Good morning. My name is Paul Julian, and I'm here with my partner, Joe Davey. We're members of the Veterans History Project Library of Congress. We're here today at the Veterans Memorial Center, and the date is February 28, 2023, and we have the opportunity to interview Paul Bartoszewicz.
Very good.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you very much. And thank you, gentlemen, for doing this also for us. This was a good chance to put something that will stay for eternity on a DVD. And I'm sure my two grandboys will really like seeing this. I was born on February 25th, 1950 in Rochester, New York. And if you do the math, since Paul said it was February 28th, I just had my 73rd birthday the other day. I graduated from Bishop Kearny High School in 1968 and went to RIT and got a deferment for the military, of course. My draft lottery number was 131. I did not win anything in my life with the lottery except that. I quit RIT before graduation and moved to Amsterdam, New York, the eastern part of New York State. And of course, I lost my deferment and was drafted on in December of 1970. But I was deferred until March of 1971, 3-month deferral, because of my enlistment for 3 years. And I chose my AIT as the signal school in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And basically, that's where my military story begins. Basic training was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Following a 2-week leave, AIT was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, known as the Single Corps School. It is no longer there in Fort Monmouth. During my AIT studies, and that lasted 36 weeks, and if you add the 8 weeks of boot camp, that fills out the 40-some weeks, and with the leaves and everything, I was in the service for 1 year by the time I got my first duty station. I served in the Fort Monmouth Honor Guard, and in December 1971, I married Kathy Schell from Amsterdam. And you see one without a hat and one with a hat. And the colorization of these pictures, well, you know, they're 50 years old. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary on December 4th of last year. Okay. I graduated AIT as a 76 Bravo and was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 3rd Infantry. That is called the Old Guard in the Army. And it's in Washington, D.C. at Fort Myers, Virginia. I worked in administration and ran sound for the unit. Some of my notable assignments were ran sound and sound effects for the first Spirit of America show. And the Spirit of America started back in the 70s at the Fort Myers Gymnasium, a very, very small venue. But that's how we started out, small venue. It has now moved to the D.C. Armory, and it's been going on ever since. So it's still running today, and I was proud to be in its inception. Say that 5 times fast. Another assignment that I had was a Jefferson Memorial Program. Every Wednesday evening, the Old Guard would put on a show at the Jefferson Memorial. Well, that show is no longer going on, I found out just this past year. But I ran sound, set sound up on Wednesday morning, did a rehearsal, and Thursday morning came down and tore down the sound and bring it back to base. I was also assigned to receive the body of President Lyndon B. Johnson, January 25th, 1973. Now, this is in a frame that I'm not going to take this out of because there's a rose in there. That rose has been in this frame for over 50 years. The captain, you see some small pictures down in the bottom here. The captain in charge of the unit, after the body left the airport, they left the sprays of flowers there, because what they did is have new sprays over at the Capitol to have them lie in state. So the captain went over to those sprays of flowers and gave each of us who manned the ceremony a rose, and that's the rose that's in this frame. After my old guard assignment, I was moved over to the Navy Yard, where there was an Army recording studio, believe it or not. And I believe I had to go over to 14th Street Bridge. If anybody's familiar with Washington, D.C., I paid a visit back there a few years back, and I didn't recognize anything. We lived off post in an apartment building. God knows where that apartment building is now. But anyway, at the recording studio, we provided taped music to a base in Germany. They couldn't have an on-air radio station because of the Cold War. This is where our unit came in. I taped a 1-hour program each day, and it was a top 40 program. We also had, besides myself, top 40, an easy listening gal, a jazz program, and a CW program, and a soul program. So by the end of the week, there were 25 large reel-to-reels tapes in the box. The box was sealed up on Friday after the last show was done and sent over to Germany. Now listen to this. I was a disc jockey for a top 40 show. Did you ever listen to a top 40 show? They still have them today. Of course, a lot of stuff is automated. But, excuse me, back in the day, the automation wasn't there. So you could mention weather, you could mention current events, you could mention time, all the crutches that a disc jockey uses to get through his program. Well, I couldn't mention that because those tapes would have been played on the German base maybe a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, or the next day. Who knows? So I can't mention that today's Tuesday. Nope. So I had to come up with other formatting to make our show meaningful and have some fun with the people on the base. We didn't even mention the base because if the tapes got into the wrong hands, we tipped the Germans off where we were. So the captain was very helpful to all of us, depending on our venue. I interviewed the carpenters for my top 40 show who came to Washington, D.C. That was quite an interview. We were also assigned interviews with very prominent celebrities. And these celebrities also came to Washington, and Fred Gwynne was coming for an event, and I was asked if I'd like to interview him. Now, if you see these pictures, you see Fred Gwynne as the Munster. You see Fred Gwynne as Car 54, Where Are You? And you also see Fred Gwynne in his civilian life. Now, I'm mentioning Car 54, Where Are You? And the Munsters. And any of the younger people that are listening to this DVD and watching the DVD would say, what is the Munsters? What is Car 54, Where Are You? If you're like our age, and I'm not going to mention any ages here in the room, but we knew those shows. So I said to him, I said, yeah, that's a great, great interview, sir, and I really, really would like to do it. So in those days, and this is a kind of long story, and this is what's going to get us through. I don't even know what time we started, so, and how far we are.
About 10:25. 10:25.
Okay, 25 minutes in?
10:25, yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's where we started.
Yeah.
So in those days, the tape recorders were the small 3-inch reel-to-reel. And the tape recorder that we had was German made. At that time, imagine that, German made for doing an interview. So at that time, that tape recorder cost over $1,200. Now you can imagine what that tape recorder with German engineering today would go for. But anyway, I had to sign out the tape recorder, put it over my shoulder, and away I went. I came to the hotel room. It was already set up by the captain. I came to the front desk and said, I have an interview with Mr. Fred Gwynn. And the gentleman behind the desk said, yes, sir. Sergeant Bartoszewicz, we're expecting you. He actually got my name right. I couldn't believe it. I'd come to find out he was a Polish gentleman, so he could say it. He gave me the room number. I went up to the room, knocked on the door, and I said, hello, Mr. Gwynn. How are you? He was 7'3", and that was no makeup for the TV shows. So we had a great interview. I really loved talking to him. At that time, he was starting to write children's books, and my wife was pregnant, and he actually gave us a signed copy of his book. That, and I don't have it anymore, but it was his inscription on the inside was, to baby Bartoszewicz. So, and we had a real good talk. I told him thank you, shook his hand, and went back to base, processed the interview, because I was going to use it on my Top 40 show, which would be a good fill for some of the things that that we could do. I could mention where these songs were, like on the top. If you remember, way back, Billboard magazine used to put out a Hot 100, and we would use that to say what songs in the United States were going now in first place, second place, blah blah blah. So some shows I did a top 10 countdown, first 5 and then the last 5 for another show. And some shows I did a special that's called For Whom the Bell Tolls. And I had a sounding bell, tolling bell. And For Whom the Bell Tolls were one-hit artists. So we had to do some looking around at music in order to fill our show. So anyway, let me get back to the Fred Gwynn story, because this is a classic. I tell the story to everybody that I know coming that was in the Army. And let me tell you, I could not make this up. Okay? I got back to base, processed the interview, threw the tape in the bulk erase bin, and later that day, the captain called me into his office. Now, he has a outer office and an inner office. In the outer office, he said, Sergeant Bartoszewicz, I have some gentlemen that would like to speak with you, and I need you to answer their questions to the best of your ability with the truth. I said, okay, sir, I will. So I went in his inner office, and there were 3 guys in black suits, black ties, and not smiling. So they asked me everything possible. What did you do yesterday? Where did you go? What room number was he in? Do you remember? Who did you interview? I mean, this is not in that order, but you got to put this all together. And it was boom, boom, boom from the 3 guys asking me questions. And what time did you leave? Did you speak to anybody when you left? Where did you go after you left? All questions like that to put me in, excuse me, in that vicinity. And when I came out, I talked to the captain, and I said, sir, am I in trouble? And he goes, no, just watch the news tomorrow. So I did. And you see, the hotel that I was interviewing Mr. Gwynn was the Watergate Hotel. And I'm walking through the lobby with a tape recorder over my shoulder. So you can see now, I'm not going to make this story up. It really did happen. And the captain said to me I had to get the tape, turn it over, and they were FBI agents, and I had to turn it over to them, and that was it. End of story. But what a story it was. By the way, Fred Gwynn died on July 2nd, 1993, almost 30 years ago. From the Navy Yard recording stint, I was within 6 months of discharge, and the Army instituted a project called Project Transition. And by the way, the shirt that I'm wearing is from the Vietnam Veterans of America, and we were able to wear our unit patch on our shoulder, and that is the Military District of Washington, the Honor Guard for the Old Guard. I know I kind of skipped over that earlier, but the Old Guard comprised not just the tomb soldiers, which we never saw. They lived underneath the tomb. But there was administration, which I was in. There was the Fife and Drum Corps. There was a caisson platoon, like the taking Lyndon Baines Johnson through the streets of Washington was on a caisson, his coffin. So that's for presidents, dignitaries, whatever, that would warrant being carried, their coffin being carried on a caisson. So there was five different platoons, if you will, of the Old Guard. So the Project Transition meant that you could serve either 6 months, half days, or 3 months, full days, at something you wanted to transition to from the Army. Well, I already had enough use of audio and disc jockey and different things like that. So I said, actually there's no money in the radio. The money's in television. So I said, why don't I transition to a television station? The Army looked around and found WETA in Washington, which was a PBS station, and assigned me to that. Well, I couldn't do the 3 month full time because I still had my show to tape. So I would go in, excuse me, prepare the show, and at noontime I would leave the Navy Yard and go to WETA studios. And let me tell you, they taught me everything there is to know in those 6 months about television. I started in master control, and that's where all the switching is done. At that time, back in the late 70s, switching was done manually. Not like today, you just press the button, the computer takes over, and you fall asleep. So, and from there, I went to set design, camera. I didn't do any news because I'm not an announcer for television, but I was more training to being a technician. So all of the facets of camera work and running the carts, so to speak. They're large cartridges that your commercials are recorded on, and that's done. It's done manually, but you have to put the cart in the. It's like a carousel. So that's how that worked. I don't know what they do today because I'm long gone out of television. But WETA was my stepping stone for television, and when I got out of the service and back home, I went to a television station in Schenectady, New York, a PBS station, and from there I ended up at WTEN Channel 10, which was an ABC affiliate in Albany, New York. So that was my stint with television. I also was real lucky concerning my discharge. First of all, the Army offered me $10,000 to re-enlist for 3 years. Now, remember, this was 1972, and I was due to be discharged in March of 1973. Well, $10,000 in 1972 was a whole bunch of bananas, let me tell you, at that time. So I talked this over with Kathy, and we decided to pass on the 10,000, and decided to go home to Amsterdam, New York, and to raise a family. Do I regret it? No. So, as I said, I was due to be discharged in March of 1973. So, here's how I got out of that discharge date. And by the way, I went in on March 20th, 1971, and I was due to be discharged in March of 74. On March 20th, and March 20th is my wife's birthday. So, I joined the National Guard in Albany, New York, and that changed my discharge date 3 months earlier to December 20th. Well, that fell in Christmas break, so I was discharged finally from active duty on December 13th, 1973. Kathy and I had one child, Kelly, who lives with our 2 grandboys in Newington, Connecticut, and they are Anderson and Keegan. And I know they're going to get a copy of this tape, that's for sure, of this DVD. After my release from the National Guard and active duty, I joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary. I remained with the Coast Guard Auxiliary for 25 and a half years, retiring, quote unquote, in 2009. Now, I guess I did this backwards. I served 3 years active duty in the Army, no pension. 3 years in the active National Guard, no pension. 25 and a half years in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. It's a volunteer organization, no pension. Do I regret it? Well, when I turned, let's see, that would have been, I went in service when I was 21. When I turned 40 years, I said to Kathy, with a little tear coming down my eyes, and I said, I would have started my Army pension today. Hindsight. So the boating safety class I taught, I got hooked up with that, and I taught that class for 23 of the 25 years I was in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And that was very, very rewarding, if you will, when I had people come up to me and said, I didn't know that these safety things were available for boaters. And I didn't know. I had one guy who was an older guy, and he said, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. I know everything there is to know about boating. I said, okay. At the end of the class, he said, thank you very much for teaching me something. So there's a few other things that I left out of my script here. On September 13th, 2022, I had the pleasure of taking the honor flight from Palm Beach Airport. And the honor flight, what that is they opened it up to Vietnam era Vietnam people. They started out, I think, with World War I, but that didn't last too long. And then they went through all the local World War II veterans in our area, and then they opened it up to Vietnam era or Vietnam veterans. And that gave me a chance to go back to Washington. We actually saw the Pentagon where the plane hit the building. It's a different color marble than it was. And of course, you know the story about the Washington Monument. It's a different color halfway up because they stopped building it for one of the wars. I don't know which one. That's military history. You're going to have to go look that up. And when we got back, now I know you told me that this lady broke down when she did her story about her husband. Well, when we got back to Palm Beach Airport, there were over 1,500 people greeting us, clapping. Welcome home. So we did see this, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And I'm going to turn this over in just a minute. See, a lot of people don't hold these things up long enough for people to see them, what they are. In the back, we'll show you the wall. Exactly on the side, and you see the picture of the Washington Monument in the background. Also, when we were on the plane coming back, we got handed an envelope. I didn't bring them all, but this was one of the cards in the envelope. They had a class of children write thank you notes to us, and then they were divided up by all of the people that did the honor flight that day. I got over 25 to 30 of these cards, letters, thank you. And I guess that's what makes it all worthwhile. The last organization that I'm a member of now, as I mentioned earlier, is the Vietnam Veterans of America. And in 2023, April 2023, I took over as president for the organization. I imagine by the time you see this, it's after April 2023. So all of my pseudo-military career was very enjoyable and a great learning experience along the way. And I'd like to thank you for this opportunity of telling my story. I don't know where we are time-wise. Are we close to 30 minutes?
We're fine.
Few minutes short.
Hey,
If you got anything to follow up
Okay.
on with me, I can try to answer your question.
okay. All right, Paul. First is, just to go back, sir, how were your parents, did you have any siblings?
I had a brother, and he lived in Orlando, Florida, actually.
And Paul, when you got drafted, how did your brother and your parents feel about you being drafted?
Okay, my parents were in Rochester, New York, and I was living in Amsterdam, New York,
Okay.
with my future wife and mother-in-law, believe it or not. I had to get her in here, God rest her soul. But anyway, and it's a funny thing about being drafted. You all know what the word drafted means, and you all know what the letter says when you open it up. Greetings, and that goes to everybody. So, we had a kitchen here, and my mother-in-law's room was right across the kitchen. And then he came down a hall, and then it was my room. And then all the way down at the end was my future wife's bedroom. I had to be close to the mother-in-law so she could keep an eye on me. But anyway, she asked me, she was cooking dinner one night. This was close to Christmas, too. In fact, it was Christmas Eve. That's right, it was Christmas Eve. And she said, can you go get me a pack of cigarettes in my room? And I said, sure, Ma. So I went in her room, I grabbed the cigarettes, and I stopped. And there was this letter addressed to me from the United States government. Okay. Went back and gave her the cigarettes, and I said, Ma, do you have anything for me that came in the mail yesterday? And she said, I wasn't going to tell you and spoil Christmas. She went in there, got the envelope, and it sure said greetings. But I'm glad I got that. Even though it was Christmas Eve, I called my recruiter up. He says, as soon as you get that, you call me. And I did, even though it was Christmas Eve. He said, on the 26th, I will call in your greetings and have it nixed. And from then on, you will be 3-month deferred to go in. And that's what gave me the March date instead of right away. So that was the answer to your question about I wasn't living with my parents, and my brother was in Orlando, Florida.
Paul, then the other thing is when you were, anytime during your service, which what I would also include after the Army, what did you have any kind of friendships? Did you make any kind of friendships?
Well, we lived off base, if you will, in Washington, in an apartment building. And the gentleman I lived with, his name was Charles Mazurek, and he served in the service in obviously in Washington. And I've tried and tried and tried, Googled everything, Department of the Army. I don't know if I even looked on the Vietnam Wall to see if he was listed on the Vietnam Wall, but to no avail. So he was my closest friend, and obviously, and then I could sit here for 2.5 hours talking to you guys. One of the other things that I left out of here is Washington, D.C. has an active USO. So I went to volunteer my time, and the gentleman's name was Denver Jones, and that's his real name. And we formed together a two turntables, and we used to have we called it WUSO. It wasn't on the air anyplace, but we would have almost like they have like karaoke now, okay? We would provide the dance music for them on a Friday and Saturday night. And he was my close friend too. And I don't remember her last name, but he married a gal named Kathy. How ironic. And the four of us used to go out to dinner. And so I would say those are my two main friends in the service.
Okay. And can you recall any particular humorous or unusual events during your whole time of service?
Unusual events?
Humorous or unusual?
Well, except for the Fred Gwynn story and the Watergate story.
Okay.
The rest of it was pretty clean as far as doing things.
Okay.
In the old guard, you always have to have a excuse me, upbeat. So as far as humorous, we always would be ragging on each other, you know, and then we'd have a job to do, whether it be see a dignitary in, see a president to his grave, help the tomb guards if they need anything, go get some supplies, that sort of thing. So it was a very tight camaraderie in the old guard. Humorous, life is fun if you make it fun.
Thank you, Paul. Now towards up to like a few questions for the end, you know, your end of service. Do you recall the day your service ended, and where you were when it ended?
Yeah, it was December 13th, 1973. That's when I was discharged, and we were able to take 2 cartons of cigarettes from the commissary home with us. Now, here's the funny story. Some guys didn't smoke, so I took their voucher and got another 2 cartons. By the time I packed up a Chevy Impala, I had over 32 cartons of cigarettes in that trunk.
Com shop.
Same as money.
They were $2 a carton at that time from the commissary. And my mother-in-law smoked, so we divided it up to Winston and Bel Air. And so I said to Kathy what the humorous thing was, I hope we don't get stopped over state lines. Because liquor was very cheap in Washington, D.C. also. So one half was cartons of cigarettes, the other half was liquor, and I shipped my clothes, the Army shipped my clothes home.
How did, and so this is kind of a broad, how did the service change you?
It made me a man, that I gotta say, because you don't have mommy doing your wash. You don't have mommy fixing your meals, although we did have a mess hall that somebody else fixed it. However, I learned how to peel potatoes very, very well. I think everybody that served in the Army or service, or and even boot camp knew that.
Paul, did you were you able to take advantage of the GI Bill?
Yes.
And what did you-
Good point. When I came back home to Amsterdam, New York, there was a college there called Fulton Montgomery Community College. As I mentioned in my script, I quit RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, in Rochester. I majored in the hockey team and the radio station. That was about it. But anyway, I decided to get, I wasn't very far from my associate's degree, so I looked into using the GI Bill, and I went to FMCC, Fulton Montgomery Community College. I can't tell you the date, but I did graduate from there.
Okay.
I do have a picture in some of our archives.
Paul, what did you major in?
Business administration.
Okay.
Yep.
And now the last few. How has the military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, you know, if you, I enlisted. I mean, people that got drafted, they really didn't have a choice. But I enlisted, so I must have felt something that this was a good thing to do. So as far as the military goes, I have no problem, and to this day, you know, I'm a member of this.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to be a member?
Mm-hmm.
It's a volunteer organization.
Mm-hmm.
I just attended the on my birthday in Lake Mary, the council, the Florida State Council, which is held quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a delegate there from our chapter, and that's when we ended up going to Cocoa. And I knew we were going to doing this, so I signed up to do this because I'm right here.
Okay. What are some life lessons you learned from your military service? Life lessons, and I think you touched on it.
Yeah, life lessons. Like I said, it made a man out of me. Learn how to keep a budget. Hello? Guys that got their paychecks at the beginning of the month, by the third of the month, gone. So if I wanted to eat and still go out and enjoy myself, I had to make sure that I budgeted. Now, the military used to get paid monthly, and now they do it the 1st and the 15th. I don't know if they do it now, but they switched over to that when I was in.
Mm-hmm.
So you know how to budget your money, how to spend your money, or put it away in a bank, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I touched on making a man out of me because I had to do my own wash and everything else. So it's something that all young people should do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Commercial.
Next, last two.
Okay.
Paul. What do you wish more people knew about veterans? What do you wish more of them knew?
That we're back. And we're back in one piece. And some of us are not. So you got to take care of all veterans, whether they be wounded or they're still able to walk around. And the people that are still able to walk around need to give back their service time to the community.
Thank you, Paul. And finally, is there anything you would like to add that we have not yet covered?
Nope. That was, like I said, it was a pretty filling and great learning experience. Each step of the way, I learned something else. Like in the old guard, learn how to be on time to set up equipment. Learn how to set up that equipment, just like you had to set up this today, and make sure it's working. So all of that stuff is important. And I didn't touch on, again, here it comes up, I didn't do it. Near the end of my time with the old guard, they saw how bubbly I was and not afraid to talk to people. So they sent me home for 6 months recruiting for the old guard. And I actually got two young gentlemen to come to our unit. So, and that takes somebody that, first of all, loves what he's doing and and not just saying, you just sign up for this. And
Mhm.
so that all was part of my military career.
Okay. Well, with that, Paul, Joe and I'd like to thank you for your service. We really thank you for coming and giving us your story, which we find very inspirational. And with that, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you.